Thank you so much for coming back to this important section on the research methods canvas. This session actually is the beginning of the technical session for this international conference, because this conference covers three key ideas: research methods, advanced research methods, academic publishing, and proposal writing. So this is where we are starting the main technical session. But however, what we did before was to provide a scaffolding in which all these things are, to which they relate. Okay. This research methods canvas is a one-page schematic of an entire research program. And I just want to walk you through it quickly, because it informs every other thing that happens from now down to proposal writing. You'll be surprised that it's the same framework that underpins every other thing else. If you master this framework, you're home and dry. When you have a problem, I just want you to concentrate on looking at the different boxes inside this. I want to talk to those boxes now quickly. At the top left box, you can see that we have what is called PSS, actually it's PSW, problem studied and why. This is when initially you are thinking about what you want to do, the research you want to do, its aim, initial objective, keywords, and expected contributions to knowledge. So 4 main things are under your problem statement: your aim, your initial objectives or objective, depending on how many of them you're playing with, the keywords that come into that, your work, both in the topic and in the objectives, and the expected contributions to knowledge. What are we getting out of it? The next thing is, you now say, okay, now that this problem is important for me, let me know what has happened before or what is happening now. That's where you go into literature. That time you are trying to think first about the problem. You are almost performing what is called a forward loop, going from problem that is in your mind first before you even think about whether it has been solved or not. Remember that at this point, you are choosing the problem. That's when you think about the sweet spot principle. Is the problem and solving significant enough? We've talked about it. Next thing you know, so, okay, let me even know what people have done in it. You go to previous literature, the next box on the top, the previous. And in that previous literature, what you have is what has happened before. And you have to look at it in terms of literature review for team 1, team 2, team K. There could be themes that come into your work, into the framing of the topic, if it's properly done. And this is what every academic must know, how these framings are done. I've given you an example that it took almost 3 days of tournament theory about for us to frame a PhD thesis properly before everybody goes away and does the bits that the person needs to do. And in each of these, you have to have a way of bringing your voice into it, researcher's voice. Now, when you finish all those themes, you go over to say, okay, if I've known what happened before, what is happening now, that is what is currently happening in the field around these teams that I'm working with. Each time again, your research voice is there. That brings you to what is called the cutting edge in your area. It doesn't matter the discipline. You have to play this game faithfully in order to actually add value to what you want to do. Now, the next question is, okay, if I have actually understood where other scholars are with this problem, what more needs to happen? What am I now doing? What am I adding to it? And that is where you then talk about gaps in knowledge. But the question you asked me is, how do you determine the gaps in knowledge? I will remind you that each time you review literature, you are talking about, what other authors say that needs to be done, future work. So you can even start from there and start saying, okay, supposing there are 20 important suggestions by previous authors on what should happen more in order to advance the cutting edge. Does it mean you have to work on 20 different gaps in knowledge? Does it mean you have to have about 20 objectives in a single project? No. You do now what is called deconstruction. You say to yourself, okay, if there are 20 suggested, importantly, interesting perspectives to take this area forward, what are the key ones there that I can do now within my 3-4 years of my PhD in order to add something, and then other people can take over from me. So you don't have to do everything. But it is in the choice of those that we know whether you're a PhD scholar or not, because it takes a lot of thinking to, pick those ones. And sometimes when you pick the right ones, you find out that other ones are actually attracted to them. So actually they summarize the other ones. So you don't need to do every one, but yet you're almost covering everything, more or less. Okay, so that's what you do. You select just some ones that are good. You can also use the sweet spot principle and say, which among these, if I do, should continue to obey the sweet spot principle of solving a significant problem. I don't think you've seen this kind of thinking in most books on research methods. I've not seen it myself. I love a lot of them in my library, to be honest. Because it's about doing this normal thing. That's why I say it is tips for success that you don't normally get in standard research methods texts. And that's why we are writing, as we speak, a super book on research methods that covers everything we've talked about today. Okay? Now, once you get to that, you now say, okay, because I'm adding new perspectives to fill the gaps, I need to go back and look at my objectives again. There's no way the initial objectives that came from your mind can cover all this. Then you have to do a backward loop. You can see the arrow going back. That arrow is now going back. That loop is going back to tighten your objectives, revise and develop your objectives. Okay? In that box below. That box below the gaps in knowledge is about reframing your objectives now to now have better objectives that accommodate your initial thinking and the gaps in knowledge that you want to close. From there, you now do the standard thing, the methodology, for instance, which is the box at the right bottom left right corner. And it has 3 bullet points you must cover. Okay? Right. Methods by each objective. You must tell us if you have 3 objectives, 3 specific methods. They may be the same, but you must make a statement of method under each objective. You cannot tell us you want to go to 2 cities and give us only plan for 1 city. It doesn't make sense. You say, it's natural. If you cannot provide objective and method for a new objective, throw it away. Don't investigate it in your work. The next thing is research philosophy. When you collect all the methods, that is what we call methodology. Methodology is nothing but an assemblage of all the methods you've considered for doing what? For implementing your research. When you look at the panoply of methods, the entire methodology, you now ask yourself, what kind of research philosophies can actually summarize them? That's when you go into the isms of research. You know what I mean? Things like interpretivism, constructivism, postmodern methods, all those isms in research, for instance, qualitative research, and a lot of other small things inside. This is just to show that as a doctor of philosophy, you are philosophizing about what you're doing. You're thinking through to see how your methods are mapping onto the canvas that summarizes different research philosophies. If you want depth in this, you have to now talk about understanding and reading widely texts and journals on research, the philosophy of science and the philosophy of social science, something like that. Or the philosophy of humanities, which is close to that of social sciences. Then, what is again important in the top bullet, you need to be able to justify every choice you're making at that level. And you are the person doing it. So when an external examiner asks a question, you say, oh, this is why I did this. I consider this, but for my work, it doesn't work well. So that's what examiners want to hear, that you are in control of what you're building or you're developing. Of course, when you go into the normal thing about, data analysis, collection, and everything, of course, the important thing is that your data must talk to your research objectives and questions, and the interpretation of the analysis must be accurate enough statistically, and then also meaningful in terms of the riot applications. You keep playing the riot in all these things. Remember, when you're doing that literature, in the corporate academic model, we do the literature, not just the research, we do it on the research, the integration of knowledge, the applications, and the teaching. So we are also learning how some authors suggest that that area or that topic should be taught. in order to make a wider contribution to knowledge. I want to spend a little time on the central arrow here. The central arrow is the biggie, because that's the one, the key to what we are trying to achieve. That is the theoretical or conceptual framework, bringing a very diverse literature together into one small summary on a page that shows all the key ideas and how they are connected. So it's a map of the entire thesis. You people need to know how this is properly done. But if you look at the other literature, you see there is an arrow going from what has been before, what is happening next, gaps in knowledge. That is called the historical development of the domain knowledge. This is where you end the PhD. But of course, another area that you must mind is the finding and discussion. The truth about research is that if you do a good conceptualization in that map in the center, which is the heart of the entire system, then every other thing follows. There are two ways you must position your final contribution to knowledge. The summative, the box on the left. You talk about the theory of the area, the research of the area, the practice of the area. When you finish that, you ramify them into 7 other aspects, taking them to pieces. That is making sure that you boil them down to details. The theoretical contribution, the links with the conceptual or theoretical framework, which is key, because actually it is within the conceptual framework that you are going to add your own new findings and make them italics, while the other people's work stay as non-italics. Examiner will see clearly that this is what you added. This is why most of my students defend their thesis in less than an hour, because the thesis defends itself using this type of map. You understand? Then you have to think about the novelty in the results. What is new actually? Model building, going beyond the theory to build things that can enable you to set up that thesis as a business and to use it to start, achieving some aspects of the Oseloka's vision that you want or interested in. If you want to build a digital firm, if you want to create products and service, whichever you want to do, you must build the models that can catalyze them. There is a concept to call prescience in research. How does this research change the field? 90% of research done in the world doesn't. Why? Because they are too single disciplinary. They are focused on one discipline. Sometimes they don't shift the needle. Incremental contributions are not prescient. But when you integrate knowledge, if you're a master of I of K, majority of the work you do will break new grounds in the field. So changing the field is called prescience. You know what it means? Seeing before, seeing further down where we are now. Of course, we know that only God is prescient, but we're saying at least we're borrowing the language. Now, the next thing you must do is to nail down the methodological novelty. What is novel about this? You must have been seeing other people's methods when you are looking at literature, but in choosing your methods to meet each of the objectives, as we said before, you are trying to use a better way to do it. That better way must be communicated at this stage of the research in what is called the methodological novelty. What many people don't do today that we do is the last one, which is called pedagogical merits. That is, how can these results mobilize better teaching of the constructs of the discipline? I think we're beginning to see how deep this thing is. So that is why when we write papers, the corporate academic people train the way I do train them. When they write papers, while the other people are talking of only 3 main contributions, theory, research, and practice, that is only one bit. That's only the summary of what they do. They now nail down these 7 areas, not always the 7, to be honest, sometimes 5 or 6 of them, which is important. This goes beyond the main 3, the other 3 that most other people use. That's why most of the theses, the PhD tech theses are actually 2 theses in one, if you understand. The traditional one about the area, all the theories and understandings, and the application that is immersed in I of K and A, in the Riot ensemble. Then if you finish that, you go to future research and the cycle continues. And that ends this, understanding of the research methods canvas. Any questions so far?
Patrick, I have a question.
Okay.
I understand what goes on here, but let me tell you what happens in the mind of some of my students.
Okay.
Some of my research students have a problem because When you go through this process, essentially, I can tell you in summary, what this tells me is do a good literature review first. And that takes us to the top column here.
Yes.
All right. You have to do a good literature review to know what the problem is, to zero in on it, to know the questions you're going to ask and the objectives of this your project.
Yes.
And when you do this with your voice, it shows that you are thinking before you get to the cutting edge. Now, students see their project in terms of the process, the writing process. They see it as chapter 1, chapter 2, chapter 3. Chapter 1 summarizes, chapter 2 is the literature review, chapter 3 is the methods that you're going to use, for instance. And because for you to write chapter 1, you would have done everything up to chapter 3 to be able to do chapter 1 based on these contents that I mentioned, the introduction, the literature review, and the methods. Yes. So candidates, I don't know, the researchers I talk with have difficulty seeing the whole research process as one global unit and seeing their project as a presentation of the research. They tend to see this research process as a logical process. I don't see it as a logical process of chapter 1, chapter 2, chapter 3. I see it as a knowledge gathering process where your mind and everything is put into it, and so that you become part of the information that you are interacting with to come up with new knowledge. And then it's after you get to the point that you understand what has been there, what is there now, and you begin to think at the cutting edge to what is going to come ahead of you. That is when you can now tell us, this is where the knowledge is. This is the problem that there is now, which the present knowledge hasn't answered. And then this is where I think we need to go to answer the questions that are faced in the quadruple helix. So this is where, for example, when you look at this canvas, it's difficult to communicate that to the students or to the candidates that are doing research, unless there is a physical person there to interact with them, to show them this.
Yes.
You get my point. And so
I get your point completely. And yes. I can even add to it, to be honest. You see,
go ahead.
When I talked about those centers for the application of every discipline, remember I said about that center? I talked about that center in terms of the 5 forces and 7 E's, but this research methods canvas is part of the 5 forces. So you now see why the students are reared on this thinking right from almost first year, because everybody comes to that center to do practical work on the construct of the discipline right from first year to final year. By the time they reach to final year, this system is in their blood already. They know now how to think beyond chaptering, to see it as a holistic, effort of mining knowledge and coming up with, dredging up something that is new. They see it as an organic whole because they are using it every day. Okay, I mean, literally, regularly inside those C4S, which don't exist now in the schools, in the universities. A big lack. You don't want to foist this on somebody only in the final year when they are just trying to collect them, let my people go, some of them. Are you getting me? They are just trying to get to youth service if it's in Nigeria. It's not about doing a wonderful work, but just to graduate. For some of them, I'm not seeing all of them. So that is why you need to make it something that they live with from scratch. It's just like teaching a child a language, a new language. The child grows with the mother tongue. You don't want to talk of the mother tongue only when the child is already 8 or 9. And the child is already speaking English more than the mother tongue. And you start playing a fool's game and say, oh, my child is not speaking. When you didn't start early enough. That's exactly what happened.
Exactly.
This is why even the university we're building is a graduate university, so that it is a finishing school for people that come from all over the place to get properly drilled in these things. Because this is the big missing link in current educational models or systems in Africa, for instance. This is what you did now is actually a wonderful contribution for me, because you're telling me the way people conceive of it when they want to use the system. The system is not something you force on them in one single year. That is why it's primary that those centers are built. Honestly. So thanks again for that. It's a wonderful observation of what is really going on. Do you remember that when I train PhD students and I'm taking it through, some of them will say, Sir, have I not got enough result to be released? They are seeing it as just being released to get the doctorate. I'm telling you.
Exactly.
And one of them, I said, you must demonstrate that this thing can be practiced before I call an external examiner for you. Initially, they remain unfriendly at that stage. But when they graduate, they come back to thank me and say, you know what? I now know why you took me through this level of torture, in quotes, for me to be an expert. Because I'm not doing an ordinary PhD. I'm doing a PhD tech, for Christ's sake. It's a different animal altogether. I mean, I'll be honest with you. In one university alone, 10 PhD tests can transform an entire university. Why? So this is exactly what I'm talking about. So I'm happy that Professor Odo has actually, enlightened us more on this. Are there any other contributions from this? So that I can answer those questions again. If there's no contribution now, let me just tell you before the next thing is that, all those things we are doing in publishing, proposal writing, they are all coming from this canvas. You won't see me do anything different, I'll be honest with you. Okay? But you're going to see how I drop the key areas of this inside my system for writing proposals. It's a 14-layered process. If you write a proposal to that level of protocol, you get the grant almost every time. So if there's a big secret in winning grants, you are getting it today. That is, if winning grants is your main game in life, I'm talking about. Okay? But it's important enough to get the grants to do your work. All right? So this is why this is important for me. This is my most important contribution to the world, the research method standard. It looks simple. It's a very deep system. Because you have to look at the literature in teams. To give you an example, every single team that comes into a PhD is punished, completely explored. Okay? The PhD on integrated modeling that we finished in 2019 has 635 references. Why? The student has to soak himself in the literature of the area. That is why I say that it forces you to do the traditional thing even better than it's being done, while still giving you the capacity to translate it to practice and use it to form companies, digital platforms that can mobilize knowledge faster than what we do inside the classroom. If there is anything that makes me happy, it is this. This little canvas is the bedrock of everything else I do. All right? And I want us to own it and work with it together. You can call me anytime and ask me if you're using it. I'll direct you. We even built a new platform completely dedicated to using this type of structure to train PhD techs informally. Some of them can be in university, we support them with assistance. We're not writing their thesis. We're only training them, giving them more skills, and they pay for it. And that particular platform is called the Global Tuition and Research Support Services, GLOTRES. It has a website, and I know that if you read our articles on LinkedIn and Medium, you will see that there is a link tree where Ijoma actually pulls every single platform we work with together. Tap into GLOTRES, it will take you to the website for GLOTRES. There are about 9 platforms. Each one you tap, it takes you to its own website. Because we're doing a detailed business. It's not about, we're not gambling these things. Because by 2025, 2026, the university that is bringing all this together is already afloat. Already being built as we speak. So that is what I talk about. We need to wake up from our slumber and help our country and help ourselves. How do you help yourself? There's no way you can do what I'm doing and remain a poor guy. Impossible. Because you are minting money in the internet, literally speaking. So why are you going to be poor? And I don't think everybody needs a little bit of money to survive. So, but I'm not saying that we do academic just for money, no. Because even when I make money, I throw a lot of it away to charity. So I'm just motivating us, please. This is serious business. When we go to writing highly publishable paper, you will notice that it is just these things that I'm putting in sections, in 9 sections. It's almost corresponding to the 9 boxes here. That's why I'm saying, if you master this, you master everything else. And you're lucky that Professor Odo is there in Nigeria, who is about the only person I'm working with that knows this, the way I know it. So if you consult him, request to join his research group, of course, you're not going to take exams. He can absorb you in his research group, and he helps you to understand this framework. Because we've worked with it for how many years now? Going to 15 years. That's why it makes life easy for me when he's around. because I can't continue to be the person saying it all, and so on and so forth. All right? I think this is important for us, the research methods canvas. So these are the questions we are going to take home and work on as part of this conference, okay? Question number 1. How do I, as a scholar of my discipline, X, where X can be any discipline you're working on, can be statistics, mathematics, real estate, microbiology, and so on and so forth. How do I home in on reasonably powerful problems to solve in the first box of this canvas, which is called PSW, that is problem studied and why I'm studying them, and develop an initial aim, an initial objective, some keywords, and some expected contributions to knowledge, well before I start advancing to literature. That's initial thinking. How do I do that? I just want to remind you that you can go back to what? The sweet pot principle. Because what it means, at least you're solving a problem that somebody once solved. But once you leave that, just like Professor Odo mentioned, you then go into an extremely deep thematic literature review of every single construct that matters in the field. Because you are training to be a master of that field. Right? So you break that into teams. In the integrated modeling project we did, there were about 10 teams that the student covered in the literature. That's why he has about 635 references in that one. It's in my office now. By the time you finish that and cutting edge, as we said, you now say, have I now learned, that's question 2, have I now learned how understanding the historical development of the domain knowledge through my thematic literature and mapping out the nature of gaps in the field, determining the best set of gaps to use that are consonant with the sweet pot principle? How do I revise my objectives, my questions, and make more progress and tighten up, going back through the backward loop on that canvas to tighten up that my initial problem statement? That's question number 2. Question number 3. Now that I've done this and come up with the objectives that are now stable, more or less, what is the best way to understand the various nature of methods that can be used and choose the best method for each objective, or the best set of methods for each objective, in order that my research is properly aligned and that the evidence base coming up can justify and completely, or at least reasonably, respond or answer to my research question. In doing this, number 3, how do I put together at the end of the methodizing, that is, at the end of the methodology chapter, a page or 2, to talk about the research philosophy? Meaning that I need also to understand the different philosophies of research, because I'm trying to get a doctor of philosophy. I'm not a technician in that sense. I'm a scholar, so I need to understand the philosophy of what I'm doing. This is very important. Then, of course, have I justified the key choices I made based on my understanding of what has happened in the field and my articulation of how best to answer my own research question? Okay. Next question. In what ways can I best collect the data that talks to those methods and links well to my research questions and objectives? And when I finish analysis, what are the best approaches to presenting the evidence of my analysis? And how can I best interpret them? Okay. The next box. In specifying my findings and discussion, are there key points to make sure we cover? I think there are. And that is developed in one of the booklets that we use to support students in Glottis. When I finish, therefore, the next thing is, have I been able to cover the 2 boxes on contribution to knowledge, the summative one, contribution to knowledge based on the theory of the area, the research of the area, the practice of the area? Let me actually differentiate among these. The theory of the area is about what happened in that theoretical or conceptual framework. All those constructs that other authors explained and the paradigms they came up with or suggestions about what brings the field together, you give me the theory of the area. So you must do a strong conceptual or theoretical framework in order to home in on the theory. You can't gamble this at PhD level. Okay. The research is how researchers then use the theory in real life. And in the cure helix, how do they use it in academia? How do they use it in supporting? That is, if possible, it doesn't have to be across all, government departments, especially for applied research that has to do with society. How do they use it in specific industry sectors where they want to create products and services for it? Okay, that's research. How are they researching these constructs and improving the research and using it? In a way, how are they doing research in the area, contributing theoretically and everything? Then the next thing is practice. What is the state of practice in the field? Some people call it praxis, which has other connotations. Okay. And then the next one is, after all this on the top, how do I go in and develop the combination of the 7 different elements of the ladder of contribution to knowledge? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Sometimes not all of them, but always mentioning pedagogical merits, methodological novelty. If there is any sense of changing the field, prescience, you have to capture it, which normally happens in PhD texts, but rarely in ordinary PhD. I'm honest about it. Because of the combination of technology and other things, sometimes a field is opened up. Okay. Model building, how do I construct frameworks of models? Of course, in software engineering, it's easy to talk about, apps, algorithms, fair enough, and software to solve problems. But in other fields, models can be a better system for valuing some kinds of properties that are not properly traded in the market, that don't have enough evidence. So how do you value that kind of properties where they've not generated enough, market data for you to do reliable valuation? How do you still get some reasonably good valuation? That's a new area. That's something about. So it could be building that system and so on and so forth. Novelty in results is really there. So you must do that. And then, of course, your future research. So that's what I want to say about why this is that important. These questions are important, very important. And then even the last one is, have I mastered the very best way or a very good way to present a conceptual framework and the models that are linked to it, and to show what I've added? I've said that what you do is you build a flow chart in a map and then put every other thing that has happened before up to the cutting edge in normal font. The new ones that you now get at the end of your work in italics. So examiner sees exactly, oh, this is what you've added. That's the best way to do it. All my theses that I supervise have it, so you can always borrow them to learn. So I think we are actually also done enough justice to the research methods canvas. And the way we spend time on it, because every other thing depends on it. You can see that the other tools simply, are different variations of the same canvas. Of course, there are other things added to them. Because if you're writing a proposal, it's not just a research, advanced research. You need to start talking about stakeholders and other things. So even if, of course, at the core of that is this, but we put other things in it to form the integrated system for writing proposals. And there are specialist workshops devoted to only proposal writing for mastery of that integrated system. But I'm presenting it just for the first time today. Okay. The same thing also, what we call the common standards for writing highly publishable papers is simply this one as it is. It's simply this put in words and in sections. I have examples of papers where I wrote a paper using that common standards